McClay. This talk has been postponed for a year. We were supposed to do it last year, and a really bad storm came in, so we had to stop it. She's going to tell you all about Lafayette. I'm going to tell you about Pat. So she's a lifetime member of the American Friends of Lafayette and serves on its governing board. She's also on the National Steering Committee, vice chair responsible for the upcoming 13-month, 24-state bicentennial of Lafayette's farewell tour. It's scheduled to kick off in New York City on August 16th, 2024. It's a good date. It's my husband and son's birthday. Besides national he did, I think he did. He knew what his plan was. Besides national and local presentations on his life in the farewell tour, excuse me, she serves on multiple tour planning committees, including New York City, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. In the DAR, Dr. McClay is the national chair for the new Franco-American Memorial Committee, which is inclusive of the Lafayette Farewell Tour. She also serves as a DAR museum docent, corresponding docent, and an outreach educator, and is the immediate past Maryland State Historian and Regent of the Janet Montgomery chapter in Rockville, Maryland. She and I have something in common. We get involved in everything.
This woman taught me the phrase, helium hands.
I just want to, again, we thank you for coming out here. I wrote all your names down on the back table over there. We have brochures about the American Friends of Lafayette, a handout about the events that will be taking place here in Newcastle on October 6th of this year. And you will need to RSVP for those. Okay, so we'll make sure we get that out. And we also have Lafayette calendars that are $25 each, and Lori will be able to help you. She does take cash only.
Or check, I'll take checks.
Or check, she said, as long as it's good. So again, I apologize, it's a little warm in here. That's controlled in Dover, it's not controlled here. And without further ado, Dr. McClay.
Same problem with the weather, but it is gorgeous, and I'm so impressed with this building. I mean, I'm impressed with this building. I've been to Philadelphia, and I've seen Independence Hall, but this building is gorgeous. And today I'm going to share with you about the Marquis de Lafayette.
Sorry, just one more thing. If you haven't already, please silence your cell phones so that we don't interrupt. Sorry.
You know these are.
Oh, and I forgot to tell you that the Battelle Reed chapter is doing this in partnership with the Newcastle Community Courthouse Museum and our brilliant site supervisor over there. She's waving. Thank you.
So we're going to talk to you today about Lafayette. We're going to talk about his life as a military person, his political life, and as a human rights advocate. One of the earliest and most universal in the sense of our earth, human rights advocate. And we're going to talk about his return to this country in 1824 as our nation's guest. So now we're going to see some words. You did what you're born. There we go. Okay, so who was this hero of both America and France, and how did he gain the respect and love of both General Washington and our nation? Lafayette began his life in a small town named Chavagnac in the southwestern French province of Avignon. He was a wealthy French aristocrat with an impressively lengthy name: Marie, Joseph, Paul, Yves, Robert, Gilbert de Montier, Marquis de Lafayette. That lengthy name seemed to foretell what was to be his long and productive life, always devoted to the Enlightenment ideals of freedom and democracy. I'm going to rejoice every time this moves, guys. At the age of 17, Lafayette resolved to join our fight for independence and came to America on La Victoire, the ship that he bought and named for victory. Once here, he and George Washington quickly developed a lifelong relationship, documented by many to be like that of father and son. He shed his blood for the American cause at the Battle of Brandywine, did much to feed, clothe, and support the American troops with his own money, and was instrumental in achieving the victory at Yorktown. After his success as an American Major General, he became a renowned French statesman who defended the rights of the Huguenots and Jews before and during the French Revolution. backed national revolutions both in Europe and South America, spoke out against capital punishment and solitary confinement, and supported women and women's ideas and causes, this being Women's History Month. And so indeed, he was a man way ahead of his time, as you will see. And so it was, let's see, I think. No, that's okay. Yes, okay. And so it was, here we go, that the Marquis de Lafayette, the last surviving Major General of the American Revolution, made his farewell tour of the United States from August of 1824 through September of 1825. He covered all the then existing 24 states as our nation's guest. Everywhere he went, he was met with a hero's welcome and received many accolades and honors. Following his final farewell to America, many monuments were created and areas of cities and towns renamed to commemorate and memorialize his visit. Among these were Fayette Street in Baltimore and, of course, in Washington, D.C., Lafayette Square. And I'm going to tell you, because we had special information from the National Park Service, how many have been to the Lafayette Square in D.C.? And who's in the center of Washington Square? Anybody know? Jackson. Guess who's going to be there? Probably by the end of this year.
Oh, good.
Lafayette is going back to the center of Lafayette Square. They're so excited. Yeah, it's around the There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, I've got to get the directions right. Today, my goal is to cover the following topics: the reason for Lafayette's tour, the implications of that tour to early 1800s America, the specifics of his visit to Delaware, and you're going to help me out on that one, and the plans now in progress to celebrate in 2024 through 2025 the bicentennial of Lafayette's American Farewell Tour, and how all of you might be able to get involved with what's going on here in Delaware. In the way of summary of his life, other than Alexander the Great, the Marquis de Lafayette had witnessed and participated in more momentous events on 2 continents than perhaps any other. At age 19, already devoted to the ideals of democracy and the rights of man, he left the comforts of Paris and the court of King Louis XVI at Versailles to join the Continental Army and fight for liberty alongside the man who would become his lifelong father figure, George Washington. In July of 1777, this unpaid young Frenchman, assigned the rank of Major General in name only, was invited by Washington to join his military family. By many accounts, Lafayette became the son that Washington never had. He fought many battles and campaigns, including the Battle of Brandywine near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he shed his blood for the American cause. He gave great amounts of his own wealth to the American Army, stayed the course during the harsh days at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778, and constantly pressed the French king to send aid for the American cause. In 1779, frustrated with his own king, whom he considered inadequately supporting the American cause, he returned to France and met face-to-face with King Louis XVI, and due to his and Ben Franklin's work together, France pledged not only for supplies and financial aid, but the much-needed French army under the command of Count Rochambeau, I could interact with the audience, and Navy under the command of, everybody remember? Comte de Grasse, which any of you going to Yorktown this year will definitely. In 1781, using his skills as a military leader, Lafayette cornered Cornwallis at Yorktown, leading to the American victory. The legend goes that when the British troops marched onto Surrender Field on October 19th, they looked only toward the French, refusing to look at the Americans' troops. Supposedly it was Lafayette who ordered the Continental Army's fife and drum corps to play Yankee Doodle, which caused the British to turn their faces first toward the Americans in surprise and then in anger. After the war ended, Lafayette returned to France and pursued both a military and a political career, championing the ideals of liberty and democracy for which he and Washington had fought side by side. With the help of Thomas Jefferson, he wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which was inspired by our own Declaration of Independence and Constitution. On July 14th of 1789, just 3 days after, this declaration was read to and met by acclaim by the liberal members of the French Assembly. The Bastille was stormed. Soon thereafter, Lafayette sent to Washington a key to the Bastille, writing, "Dear General, this key is a tribute which I owe to you as a son of my adopted father, as an aide-de-camp to my general, and as a missionary of liberty to its patriarch." With the onset of the French Revolution, Lafayette was appointed commander-in-chief of the Paris National Guard and tried desperately to steer a democratic course through the early years of that French Revolution. In August of 1792, radical factions took control of the French government and Lafayette was labeled a traitor. He was ordered to be arrested. He fled France but was captured by Austrian troops who supported King Louis XVI. Lafayette spent more than 5 years, from 1792 through 1797, in an Austrian prison under dreadful conditions and most of the time in solitary confinement. It was here that Adrienne, his wife, and 2 daughters, Anastasie and Virginie, named after Washington's home state of Virginia, stayed with him for 2 years and were known to the world as the prisoners of Olmütz. After 2 years in exile in Holland, Lafayette did eventually return to France in 1799, but only after both Adrienne and the American Congress had repetitively petitioned Napoleon for his release. Upon his return, Lafayette refused to participate in Napoleon's government or his military conquest, despite the invitation to do so. Because to Lafayette, a government leader was a president and not an emperor. So instead, he continued his determined efforts to bring democracy to France. After the conservative Bourbon kings were restored to the French throne in 1814, Lafayette became a strong voice for the liberal democratic members of the Chamber of Deputies, a position to be held for the majority of the remainder of his life. By 1824, King Louis XVIII died, and his brother, Charles X, ascended the French throne, instituting an extremely conservative, undemocratic monarchy. By this time, Lafayette had already been under tight surveillance as a dissident. So with Charles X as king, he retired from public life to live with his family at La Grange, an estate near Paris owned by his wife's family, as nearly all of his possessions and his property had been confiscated during the French Revolution as well as by Napoleon. He left intensely saddened as nearly every trace of liberal democratic thinking had disappeared from France. It was at this time that the opportunity to leave France came in the form of an invitation from President James Monroe to tour the United States. Happily, at the age of 66, Lafayette left France for his final trip to the America that he loved. There we go. Meanwhile, the early 1820s, you guys are such a great audience. Seeing you bumping into this. Meanwhile, in the early 1820s, it saw the United States working to solidify its own political system. It was a nation now free of any wartime obligations. Thomas Jefferson, a lifelong friend of France, had negotiated the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, thereby guaranteeing and securing America's westward expansion. But by 1823, both Congress and President James Monroe, the last of the founding father presidents, decided that a visit by Lafayette might help unify a democracy being fractured by the divisive politics of the 1824 presidential election between John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, and William Crawford. Sound a little bit like today, and we're glad Lafayette's coming back. No longer the slim, young, 19-year-old military officer in a powdered wig, the 66-year-old Lafayette happily accepted the invitation to return to the land of his youth. But he returned a different person, having survived rebellion, 5 years in prison, the death of his much-loved wife, Adrienne, and the disintegration of the Enlightenment ideals of liberty and democracy in his homeland. He decided that this would be his farewell tour of the America that he loved, and as we will see without a doubt, loved him back. Although Congress's invitation to Lafayette was official, Monroe's was both official and personal. America was approaching the 50th anniversary of its Declaration of Independence, and Monroe and Congress wanted Lafayette to reignite a greater feeling of patriotism in America. But Monroe's invitation was also quite personal. And why, you may ask? Because Monroe and Lafayette had a long history together. It was a relationship that was cemented during the American Revolution. Now, Lafayette arrived in South Carolina on June 13th of 1777 at the age of 19. You gotta remember, he was a teenager when he got here, age of 19. The Battle of Brandywine occurred 3 months later on September 11th. It was one of the largest battles of the war, involving more than 30,000 soldiers and lasting 11 hours. For the young Lafayette, the Battle of Brandywine was also his very first combat experience. Meanwhile, Washington, who had grown quite fond of the young Frenchman, did not really want him to be in the heat of battle, something Congress strongly supported due to his wealth and influence with the French court. However, the story goes that Lafayette, well educated in military tactics, listened as reports came into the into the area where Washington was standing, and he realized quickly the progress that the battle was taking and the seriousness of the battlefield movements by Howe and Cornwallis. Repetitively, Lafayette requested of Washington to be allowed to join Sullivan's forces, so determined was he to stem the British advance. And there are some who have written that he was almost like a puppy dog bouncing around Washington to be able to get into battle. Washington reluctantly granted him permission, and it is written that once Lafayette joined the battle, his presence, quote, inspired the American troops, and he led as if a seasoned veteran, close quote. Lafayette was instrumental in rallying his part of the retreating line of the American soldiers, continuing to do so even after being shot through the left calf by a British bullet. It is written that as soon as George Washington heard that the young Lafayette had been shot, he immediately sent his personal surgeon, John Corcoran, saying, "Take care of him as if he were my son, for I love him with the same affection." Along with Dr. Corcoran, Washington also sent a brave young captain who had been ordered to protect Lafayette as he was hurriedly transported away from Brandywine. This captain himself had been wounded and heroic at the Battle of Trenton and spoke fluent French. Who was this captain? None other than the future President James Monroe, who gets the prize in the front row. And both he and Lafayette would become lifelong friends. Therefore, it is not at all surprising that Monroe's invitation was warmly received and readily accepted by the Marquis. Sadly, in order to visit America, this once wealthy Lafayette had to sell cattle and borrow money in order to finance his trip. He had spent much of his wealth in support of the American Revolution, and nearly all of the rest was lost in the French Revolution's reign of terror or confiscated by Napoleon. What was saved came only through the tireless efforts of his wife, Adrienne. She was an incredibly dynamic and well-educated woman. She died in 1807 at the young age of 48. When Lafayette left for his American tour, he was accompanied by his son, George Washington Lafayette, named after George Washington. And pictured here, in the upper left corner in the painting, is a picture of George at age 11 with his 33-year-old father, Lafayette, celebrating the July 14, 1780 day, the first official Bastille Day, or La Fête Nationale, as it is said in France. Below that is the picture of George as he appeared in 1825 at the age of 46. Also accompanying Lafayette was his secretary, Auguste Lavasseur, and a valet Bastion. Lafayette had selected Lavasseur for the trip as he was a young French captain who was willing and expressed the desire to overthrow Charles X, so he knew he was both intelligent as well as in favor of the ideals of democracy. As to the farewell tour itself, it would cover the then existing 24 states, span 13 months, and take the men over 6,000 miles, traveling by stagecoach, canal barge, and steamboat. While Lafayette did enjoy the opportunity to see old friends and revisit the memories of his youth, it was the story of American democracy that he wanted to take back to France, hoping to use it as an example to revive liberal political thinking at a time when conservative French Bourbon kings were stifling all ideas of democracy and enlightenment. To Monroe's relief, Beginning with Lafayette's very first footsteps on American soil in New York City, the trip unfolded as a major success. For Americans, while almost 50 years had elapsed since the end of the Revolutionary War, the presence of General Lafayette as the nation's guest triggered a national memory that unleashed monumental desire to express nothing but the deepest and most heartfelt gratitude, coupled with an outpouring of love and respect. No matter where he traveled, Lafayette was met with great demonstrations of joy. So great that he often had to travel at night just to ensure that he could keep to his schedules. Can you imagine his handlers? No GPSs and no cell phones back then. They did send people ahead to tell the towns where to get ready, but sometimes they weren't there in time, so they would scramble when he brought them to town. Preparations made by each city and town so as to receive their eminent guest in the grandest of all styles. And here are a few examples. In early August of 1825, Lafayette stayed at the White House with the new president, John Quincy Adams. Along with President Adams, he traveled to Virginia to visit Jefferson and Madison, where the following occurrence happened, as documented by Lavasseur. Quote, "At the Potomac Bridge, we stopped to pay the toll, and the gatekeeper, after counting the company and the horses, received the money from the president and allowed us to pass on. But we had gone only a very short distance when we heard someone calling after us, 'Mr. President, Mr. President, you have given me 11 pence too small, too little. I need more.'" That's being a penny. Presently, the gatekeeper arrived out of breath, held out the change that he had received from the president, and explained the mistake. The president looked at the money, examined it, re-examined it, and agreed he was correct and ought to have another 11 pence. Just as the president was taking out his purse, there's no aids here, the president's paying for this, which I just understand. The gatekeeper recognized General Lafayette in the carriage and immediately wished to return the entire toll, declaring, "All gates and bridges are free to the nation's guest." Lavasseur then wrote that throughout this entire tour, Lafayette had only once paid a toll, and that was on this day when he traveled with the President of the United States, a time when in every other country he would have never paid a cent. To say the least, Lavasseur continued to be more than intrigued with American democracy. And sometimes the events were quite comical. In his memoirs, Josiah Quincy Jr. describes the moment when Lafayette left Vermont for New Hampshire in June of 1825. Quote, "To me, his last words were, 'Remember, we must meet again in France.' And so saying, he kissed me upon both cheeks. An enthusiastic lady of my acquaintance said, 'If Lafayette had kissed me, depend upon it, I would never have washed my face again as long as I lived.'" Indeed, the ladies were beyond excited to meet the gallant and gracious Marquis. And the story is told that upon introduction, he would always bow quite low and gracefully kiss their gloved hand. Many a lady, upon receiving such a kiss, immediately swore to never wash that glove again. Hence, many museums have beautiful gloves, such as the one seen here, and indeed, many were never washed. And as for Lafayette, he is known to have said that it was more than embarrassing to repetitively have to kiss his own face. These stories encapsulate how people perceived Lafayette's physical and spiritual essence and presence on their visit. All Americans shared the greatest desire to be near him, shake his hand, or receive his personal blessing. Walter Harriman, who served 2 terms as governor of New Hampshire, recalls the crowd in attendance when Lafayette passed through Warner, New Hampshire on June 27th of 1825. Quote, "Before Lafayette could alight from his carriage, the eager crowd pressed forward to look upon his face and to grasp his hand." As for the farewell tour itself, it was quite a fast-paced schedule for a 67-year-old man. Using this pictured original map of the tour gives us a quick overview of his travels. After arriving in New York City to great fanfare in August of 1824, he traveled to the northern and eastern states and then on to Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. He spent time in the new capital, Washington City, or Washington, D.C. today, and then he moved south to the Carolinas and Georgia, and west to the new states of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. From New Orleans, he traveled up the Mississippi River by steamboat to Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. He then re-entered western Pennsylvania, including to my hometown of Pittsburgh, where a grand ball was held. From Pittsburgh, he moved to Erie, visited Niagara Falls, and then with his desire to see all the new technologies in America, he followed sections of the unfinished Erie Canal, eventually arriving in Albany, New York. And then it was down the Hudson River and over to Boston, timed so as to have him ceremoniously lay the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1825. Every possible type of event was held to honor Lafayette. Parades, picnics, dedications, and balls, and all were accompanied by grand speeches that spoke of national gratitude, Lafayette's honor and his virtues, and his valor and dedication to the ideals of democracy. But each speech always had a common theme, and that was the monumental joy and love felt by all for their hero. All too soon, the tour had to end, and it did so appropriately in Washington City. After a solemn congressional farewells, it was time for Lafayette and his companions to begin their return journey back to France. However, President Adams could not allow the nation's guests to leave without at least one more celebration in his honor, and that was Lafayette's 68th birthday on September 6th of 1825. A fine dinner was held at the White House to celebrate the occasion. Although intended to be a grand event, Lafayette's impending departure gave it a more somber tone. Saying goodbye to the nation's guests was not something anyone wanted to do. During the dinner, President Adams offered a short toast, quote, to the 22nd of February and the 6th of September, birthdays of Washington and Lafayette. Many smiled as yet once more the father and son were joined in a single toast, just as they had been so closely joined during the American Revolution. In response, Lafayette expressed his sincere gratitude to President Adams, toasting, "To the 4th of July, the birthday of liberty in both hemispheres." Sadly for all, the day of his departure arrived. After an American tour that rekindled old friendships, celebrated past triumphs, and inspired renewed patriotism in the hearts of American people, the nation's guests had to return home. On the morning of September 7th of 1825, banks closed and businesses were suspended. As the people of Washington gathered around the White House in anticipation of Lafayette's departure. A group of dignitaries gathered in the White House entrance hall, arranging themselves in a circle as President Adams spoke. The doors had been opened so that the public who had gathered outside could hear his address. President Adams, moving tribute to Lafayette, expressed gratitude and joy. Quote, "It is scarcely an exaggeration to say that it has been to the people of the Union a year of festivities and enjoyment, inspired by your presence." Following President Adams' speech, Lafayette gave an emotional response which concluded, "God bless the American people, each of their states, and the federal government. Accept this patriotic farewell from an overflowing heart. Such will be its last throb when it ceases to beat." Lafayette then embraced the president and went back inside to regain his composure. He returned to hug President Adams, once more uttering, "God bless you," and then officially departed the White House. He entered a carriage with the Secretaries of State, Treasury, and Navy and proceeded along a crowded route to the Potomac River. Lafayette boarded the steamboat Mount Vernon and sailed down the Potomac River. He stopped at Mount Vernon yet one last time, so as to be close to his beloved adopted father, George Washington. The Mount Vernon delivered Lafayette and his party to the USS Brandywine, which was originally built in our own Washington Navy Yard as a 44-gun frigate called originally the Susquehanna. Shortly before it was to be launched in the spring of 1825, President Adams decided that it was an American warship that should carry Lafayette back to York. Accordingly, the selected Susquehanna was then renamed the Brandywine in honor of Lafayette. Officers and crew were selected from as many states as possible, and then practical also from descendants of patriots who originally fought in the American Revolution. From the Navy Yard, the frigate sailed to await its honored passenger at St. Mary's City, Maryland. On September 9th, with Lafayette aboard, the Brandywine left St. Mary's City and sailed down the Chesapeake to the open ocean. After quite a stormy 3 weeks at sea, and by the way, Lafayette always got seasick. That's the few things I have in common with him, aside from the love of democracy, which I guess. After a stormy 3 weeks at sea, the Brandywine arrived at Le Havre, France in early October. The ultra-reactionary King Charles X ordered intimidating questioning to be given concerning Lafayette's return, as the Marquis's democratic views were not a part of Charles's agenda. Finally, however, the Brandywine's honored guest disembarked and returned to his home in La Grange. Now, I would like to spend a little time focusing on Lafayette's visit here to the home state of Delaware, so let me know what I get wrong. I have given these in many different states and many different places, and I do welcome what I may get wrong, so I can prove it. Now, after leaving Chester, Pennsylvania, Lafayette first stepped onto Delaware soil, or what was described by Lavasseur as the frontier of the state of Delaware, early on the morning of October 6th of 1824. They were greeted by Colonel Lewis McLean, who, in his youth, had commanded with great courage a company of militia during the Virginia campaign. Then, in June of 1781, McLean traveled on the ship the Congress to carry dispatches from George Washington to Admiral de Grasse, who was with the French fleet in Haiti. It was McLean who convinced de Grasse to bring his fleet to the Chesapeake Bay in August of 1781, important in the setup of the Battle of the Chesapeake, leading to the American victory at Yorktown. Before McLean returned to Delaware in September of 1781, he expertly commanded the Marines on board the Congress during the capture of the British war sloop, the HMS Savage, long considered one of the hardest fought single ship actions in the American Revolution. When the farewell tour reached Delaware, McLean was 80 years old and greeted Lafayette on horseback while wearing the original hat and plume of the American Revolution. Lafayette replied to his greeting in a speech that praised the heroic role of the brave Delaware soldiers who fought in the American Revolution, in which he himself had definitely witnessed. At 10:30 a.m., the procession traveled the 7 miles to Wilmington, with Lafayette riding in an elegant barouche carriage drawn by 4 white horses. Wait a second. Where's the horses? There we go. It's not turning. Sorry. The road was crowded with people on foot, horseback, and on carriages. Many carried and waved evergreen, symbolizing eternity and everlasting life. Everyone wanted to shake his hand or merely touch him. The parade passed under a handsome arch erected on Naaman's Creek. Did I say that right, guys? Yes. Which was also decorated with evergreen and the likeness of Washington and the words, "Delaware welcomes Lafayette." At the 2-mile mark, 13 cannons were fired. Why? To extinguish the colonies. And at the 3/4 mark from the city, the procession was joined by 100 Freemasons, headed by Grand Master J.G. Wrinkle and various officers. On that same day, Lafayette arrived in Wilmington, the largest city in Delaware with a population of 6,000 and the center of considerable commerce due to its access to water navigation and proximity to both Philadelphia and Baltimore. He was escorted to the town hall and greeted by dignitaries and citizens. The crowd was estimated to be about 12,000, double the normal size of the city. There were at least 4 arches on the parade path, all decorated with evergreens and flowers, as were the homes along the parade route. There were handsome illumination transparencies, one bearing the name of Lafayette in large letters. They were a beautiful vision at night. Lavasseur was sure to remark on the splendid array of female beauty. He always remarked in his diary, if any of you want to read this, he always remarked about beautiful women in America. He's a young French chapter. At 3 p.m., the nation's guests dined with 100 others in a sumptuous meal at long tables in the town hall. Oh.
Uh-oh.
Okay, I think we're good. Yep. Sorry there. Okay. Many speakers gave many speeches in Lafayette's honor. But one example is the one given by Freemason Grand Master Brinkle. And he stated the following, quote, this was a very short excerpt from that speech. Quote, "We cannot forget that despite being surrounded by the endearments of your family, with a fortune which enabled you to enjoy at home all the pleasures in which youth could have zeal, separated from us by 3,000 miles of ocean, and bound to us by no ties save those which impel the good to interpose between the oppressor and the oppressed. You came to our aid through dangers and difficulties, that you entered our little army without a rank, that you risked your life, that you shed your blood in our battle, and in short, that you identified your feelings with those of an American and a patriot." At the dinner that night, bands played and multiple toasts were offered. I thought I'd put all those Bibles there just so there usually were a ton of toasts. I don't know how they got up from the table and they had to drink because you did not sit because it would be considered rude not to drink during these toasts. Not just the Freemasons, it was everyone. So, toast to Lafayette. Welcome to the nation so deeply indebted to his generous and heroic services for the liberty and happiness it now enjoys. To Lafayette, the friend of mankind by nature, of America by choice. To the liberty of the press, there can be no trace of freedom where it does not exist, and no tyranny where it cannot be found. To the state of Delaware, small in the geography of our country, large in the list of heroes and statesmen. To civilization, to every part of the globe where it does not exist, and free government to every civilized state. I also want to share that additional interesting toasts given at the Wilmington dinner, quote, "To the memory of Dr. Bowman. Olmutz bears testimony to his devotion to free principles in the heroic display of his friendship to Lafayette." So who was Dr. Bowman? Erich Bowman was a German physician who participated in the plot to free Lafayette from Olmutz prison, along with the American Francis Huger, from South Carolina. The twist to the story is that Francis Huger, born in Charleston, South Carolina on September 17th of 1773, was the son of Benjamin Huger, who entertained the 19-year-old Lafayette at his Prospect Hill plantation home in South Carolina upon his initial arrival in America on June 13th of 1777. Then a small boy of 4, Francis became an ardent admirer of Lafayette and followed his career closely as the Marquis rose to lead France during the early years of the French Revolution. And in 1794, while studying medicine in Vienna, Huger learned that Lafayette was a prisoner at Olmutz, located in the Habsburg Austrian Empire, now the Czech Republic. Determined to rescue him, he joined in a plot with Erich Bowman involving letters written in invisible ink. On November 4th of 1794, they succeeded in freeing Lafayette, only to see him recaptured several days later. Following the incident, both Huger and Bowman were also imprisoned at Olmutz prison. Bowman was able to escape to America and eventually lived in London, England. He eventually went to live in London, England. After 8 months of solitary confinement as a security risk in Austria, Francis Huger was paroled on condition that he return to the United States. Back in South Carolina, the physician studied artillery engineering and was commissioned as a colonel of artillery during the War of 1812. I love the circles of these stories. The circle was complete when Colonel Huger was reunited with Lafayette in 1825 while on farewell tour. Lafayette insisted that Huger travel with him for a distance, and Huger then held a grand reception for Lafayette at his home in the Huger House in Charleston, South Carolina. But there are so many of these stories where Lafayette has interacted with someone at some point in his life. And the thing about Lafayette is he never, ever forgot a face or a name. Now, I can remember a face. My kids know to introduce themselves when I'm standing in front of them. But Lafayette, he remembered everyone, no matter their rank, no matter their race, no matter their creed. He remembered them. Okay. Lafayette tried to resume his travels to Baltimore, but was further delayed in Newcastle. See, guys, really. He was delayed in Newcastle, Delaware, as he was attending the wedding of Victor DuPont, nephew of E.I. DuPont, owner of the gunpowder mill near Wilmington, today known as DuPont Company. His bride was Miss Dorcas Montgomery Van Dyke, daughter of the U.S. Senator from Delaware. According to Lavasseur, the ceremony was conducted in the rites of the Reformed Church and was of interest in its simplicity. Remember, they're Catholics in France. According to Lavasseur, it was held in the drawing room of the home and was attended by Lafayette and his companions, as well as family and a few invited friends. The minister addressed the newlyweds with a short speech explaining, without mysticism, their duties as husband and wife, and then performed the wedding ceremony, ending with a touching prayer in English, to which everyone could join from the heart, because everyone could understand it. To quote Lavasseur, because remember, it was back in Latin, many were doing Latin back then, so it was done totally in English. To quote Lavasseur, despite the absence of costume and decorations, the ceremony appeared to be as worthy and as imposing as a Catholic marriage. Lafayette then departed for Frenchtown, Maryland, to then board a boat to Baltimore. Lafayette's final visit to Wilmington was on July 25th of 1825, when a large delegation composed of officials from Maryland and Virginia were waiting to conduct him to the battlefields of Brandywine. To quote Lavasseur, the battle was lost, but the English paid dearly for their victory, and on this day, Lafayette had sealed with blood his allegiance and alliance with the principles for which he had crossed the ocean, and had just ensured himself forever of the gratitude of a nation among whose people generous sentiments outlived generations. On that same day, Lafayette was presented with a box made from an oak tree that had grown on the battleground of Brandywine. The box contained Lafayette's certificate of membership to the Delaware Freemason Grand Lodge. In accepting the gift, Lafayette said, quote, "Of all the high gratifications I have experienced in my progress through my adopted country, my receptions by the 24 Grand Lodges of the United States have afforded me the greatest gratification. Accept, most worshipful Grand Lodge, my thanks for the honor you have conferred by enrolling me among your members." Lafayette, his son, George Washington, and his secretary, Lavasseur, all signed the charter of the new Delaware Freemason Lafayette Lodge number 14. Now, is it still in existence?
Yes.
Thank you. And Lafayette did become a Freemason. Some say he became a Freemason at a very young age when he was at Metz, France. And some people think that he was made a Freemason by George Washington in the United States, but he already was. And because he and Washington were both Freemasons, as were many of the other officers, that is one more level of acceptance that he received because he already was a member of the Freemasons. After celebrating his 68th birthday on September 6th at the White House banquet, Lafayette left for France on September 9th of 1825. He died on May 20th of 1834 at the age of 77 and was buried in Picpus Cemetery in Paris, next to his lifelong love, Adrienne. As per his father's request, his son George covered his coffin with soil that was collected from the site of the Battle of Bunker Hill. The French government forbade a public funeral, but in the United States, President Andrew Jackson ordered the same honors as given to the death of George Washington. Flags were flown at half-staff, and the Capitol was draped in black, and nearly every city and town held its own memorial service. You will note the American flag standing at Lafayette's headstone. It has flown in that same place since the end of World War I and was left untouched during the Nazi occupation of Paris in World War II. And it was at this site that Colonel Stanton, Pershing's assistant, who walked up to the grave, gave an incredible speech talking about how the Americans were there to guarantee the closure of World War I and the freedom of France and then turned around to the grave, raised both of his arms, and said, "Lafayette, we are here." That famous saying. I would now like to take a moment to tell you a few stories that speak of the deeply caring nature and the humanity of the hero of two worlds. Lafayette was overjoyed to be invited back to America in 1824 and was overwhelmed by the celebrations, festivities, honors, and adulations he received from all who he met and saw. It was Thomas Jefferson, however, who reminded President James Monroe of their guest's financial plight. As a result, Lafayette received from an appreciative U.S. Congress $200,000, which today would be nearly $5.7 million. Along with that money, he was also gifted a land grant to property in Florida. Located, I know. I used to live with Orlando people, so I got this. Located in what is today's Tallahassee area, and I visited this site where the land was, because they were marked there. He was given in gratitude for his valor and in the hopes that he might return and choose to be the governor of this area and remain in the United States. While on his tour, Lafayette met old friends, made new ones, and humbly accepted the honors that America bestowed upon him. He was often asked if he enjoyed American food while on his tour. Well, we recall, he did live in America during the American Revolution and ate with the American troops, often in quite meager quantities. But the answer to the question about food was a resounding yes. He loved American food, and he especially loved American oysters. On his travels, he made sure to visit people he knew from the Revolutionary War. This was especially remarkable in the slave state of Virginia, when in Yorktown, he publicly and ceremoniously stopped his carriage, got out, and greeted James Armistead, a Virginia slave who played a pivotal role as a double agent during the siege of Yorktown in September through October of 1781. After finding out that James was still enslaved, he worked through the Virginia legislature for his manumission. Once freed, James took Lafayette's name as his own. The longevity of such friendship speaks volumes of Lafayette and his humanity. He had a talent for finding connections with everyone, no matter their station in life. He looked at people as individuals and always and forever remained a true friend. And then there's the story of Hannah Archer Till. Hannah was an enslaved African-American who served as the personal cook for General Washington during the war years. And at Lafayette's request, even though he had many other soldiers and generals around him and officers, he asked her to help him with his English. As a slave, she had saved enough money to purchase her freedom on October 30th of 1778 and assumed the surname Archer. She married Isaac Till, a New York whipmaker, who also cooked for Washington. Noticed for her dignity and grace, Hannah, initially enslaved and then as a free woman, served as the personal cook for Washington, working for 6.5 years and during all of his campaigns. It was important for the general to have a trusted person as his cook, as poisoning was an oft-used assassination technique. In the harsh winter of 1777 at Valley Forge, Hannah gave birth to her son, Isaac Worley Till, Jr. After the surrender of the British at Yorktown in 1781, Hannah was employed by Lafayette for an additional 6 months before her term ended with Washington. She also, when he returned on his trip to Philadelphia in 1824, to the surprise of many, he visited this formerly enslaved black woman in her home. The two shared fond memories of their time together during the American Revolution and of George Washington, the great general that they both loved. When Lafayette learned that Hannah was in arrears on her mortgage and in danger of losing her home, he sent her more than enough money to pay off her debt and to keep her well until the day of her death. As with the story of Hannah Till, Lafayette's humanity defined his beliefs. Unlike many American founding fathers who voiced that all men were created equal, but then went on to extend those rights and liberties only to white males. No offense, guys. Lafayette believed in freedom for all. He adamantly opposed slavery and repetitively called upon America's founders to bring an end to enslavement of the Negro in America. To support his beliefs in 1785, 2 years after the end of the American Revolution, Lafayette and his wife Adrienne started the Cayenne Project, a plan intended to emancipate slaves. They purchased 3 plantations that Adrienne called La Belle Gabrielle, all located in what is now French Guiana in South America. The name means, quote, the beautiful strength of God. They paid for 70 slaves and moved them to the plantation to harvest cloves and cinnamon, work that was easier than growing and harvesting tobacco or sugar. All were paid a salary, respected for their work, and educated with the express intent of allowing them to take over the property. Indeed, emancipation was well underway when, unfortunately, with the advent of the French Revolution's reign of terror in September of 1793, all of Lafayette's properties were confiscated by the government, including La Belle Gabrielle. However, Lafayette later took heart from the fact that when the French National Convention freed all slaves in 1794, Cayenne was the only French colony that did not experience great social upheaval. By the time Lafayette returned on his visit in 1824, he was quite frustrated that slavery remained in America. Let me see this with my finger. Here we go. Okay. Now I'd like to take a moment to discuss the 2024 and 2025 tour itself. The official host for the entirety of the bicentennial of Lafayette's Farewell Tour is an organization called the American Friends of Lafayette, or AFL for short. The AFL was founded on May 20th of in 1932 at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. We work to promote public awareness of the ideals of Lafayette as a great visionary leader, including the inspirational quality of his remarkable career, his contributions to our own struggle for independence, and his ceaseless efforts to forge an eternal bond of friendship between the United States and France. These goals are supported by our continual research into Lafayette's life and work. The AFL has established the Bicentennial Tour Committee, made up of a network of subcommittees representing each of the 24 states that Lafayette visited on his tour, inclusive of Washington, D.C. and West Virginia, since West Virginia did not become a state until 1863. There will be hundreds of planned festivities, both in large cities such as Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Charleston, and Savannah, as well as in a multitude of small towns, such as here. Who here is working on the committee? Valerie is. Thank you guys so much. Picture here is the AFL hosted dedication of the statue of Lafayette, Washington, and Rochambeau, and the celebratory dinner that followed, held during the celebration of Yorktown Days in 2022. And while our goal is always to educate, believe me, we know how to party, as did Lafayette. And as to the Bicentennial Tour itself, just as Lafayette did when he first arrived from France, we will start our celebration on August 16th of 2024 in New York City at Castle Garden, or what is now known as Castle Clinton Monument, which I was there 2 days ago. We were planning out the final walkthrough where it's going to go. We are hoping that we might possibly have Lin-Manuel Miranda on the boat where it happens when he lands. During the next 13 months, we will follow Lafayette's footsteps in the exact order that he traveled in 1824 to 25. We are following his exact itinerary to the day and the time. Well, closely to the day. On October 7th, we will be at Fort McHenry, when the Museum of the American Revolution's replica of Washington's campaign tent will be on display, just as the original tent was in 1824. We will reenact Lafayette's emotional visit when he first saw the very tent in which he and George Washington spent so much time together, and quickly became their close father and son bond. On October 17th of 2024, join us as we travel to Washington's tomb at Mount Vernon to commemorate Lafayette's sad and tearful visits. On October 19th, meet us at Yorktown to celebrate both the victory of 1781 and Lafayette's return on that very same day in 1824. We're now in negotiations to have the first fireworks ever at Yorktown Days, as well as a flyover by the French Air Force over Yorktown. It's going to be a huge event. And and our President General of the DAR will also be there, Mrs. Hamlin Wright. Lafayette was the first foreign dignitary to address a joint session of Congress on December 10th of 1824. He was also, by the way, the first person ever to have a ticker tape parade through the Canyon of Heroes in New York City, which is the route we're going to be taking up, ticker tape up Broadway. But then it wasn't ticker tape, it was ladies' handkerchiefs and rose petals. So watch the reenactment of this very same speech to be held with great national fanfare on December 10th of 2024 in that very same chamber of the House of Representatives on Capitol Hill. It will be at Statuary Hall. Now, I don't know if any of you worked with the government in trying to get the use of the building. It has taken us a while. We just found out a week and a half ago that we get to use Statuary Hall to actually reenact where he was when he did it. August of 2025, please join us as we mark the occasion when the New York State Militia first adopted the name National Guard to honor Lafayette as the Commander-in-Chief of Paris's National Guard. This name change to National Guard was applied to all the state militias in the United States by order of Congress in 1916 and has remained so to today. So the National Guard, every time you see them, are named after Lafayette. Finally, join us in Washington, D.C. on September 9th of 2025 to bid Lafayette farewell as we board a boat and sail down the Potomac River, stopping at Mount Vernon just as he did 200 years ago. I've done that. I've done that. Here we go. AFL is now an official partner with the American 250, the federal commission organized to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation. The AFL's goal is to work as partners to plan for both the 2024-2025 Lafayette Farewell Tour, as well as the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial. Took me a while to say that word. Working with America 250 affords us the opportunity to make sure that the Franco-American alliance is highlighted during the 250th celebration. So how can all of you help our Bicentennial Committee? You saw who raised their hands here? At this point, we are all very busy researching Lafayette's visit to American cities and towns. When we find speeches, we will need reenactors in period attire to read them. If there was a parade, we will need help for the planning. If there was a banquet or ball, we will need help to find and recreate the menus, including the oysters. If dignitaries were present, we will need local reenactors to reinterpret them. We will not be simply having parties and throwing commemorations, but doing and saying exactly what happened exactly 200 years ago, and in particular bringing forward this man as a human rights advocate. So, wrong way. I'm going the right way. Yet with all of these events, our greatest goal is to show that Lafayette is still relevant today. That he is not just was not just a savvy major general or a capable diplomat, but also an abolitionist and a supporter of religious freedom and women's rights. Americans think our present political scene is the most divisive ever, but that 1824 campaign was equally bitter. Yet back then, Lafayette played a major role in uniting our divided nation. Today, we hope that by telling the story of his life, Americans might again join together to celebrate the freedom and democracy that he loved until his last breath. Our plans also include highlighting Lafayette as an avid abolitionist who saw and opposed slavery as he toured the South in 1825. He wrote often about his disappointment in the America he fought to make free, yet an America that still committed human bondage. Lafayette is quoted to have said, "I would never have drawn my sword in the cause of America if I could have conceived thereby that I was founding a land of slavery." Nor are today's Americans aware that Lafayette was also a champion for religious rights. As a young man in America, Lafayette saw religious freedom on full display. When he returned to Catholic France, he worked with determination to expand the political and religious rights of Protestants and Jews. Finally, all should know that Lafayette was a supporter of women's rights. He respected and admired strong women like his wife, Adrienne, and befriended and assisted several women, including the author and abolitionist Frances Fanny Wright. When Napoleon enforced his strict Napoleonic code, it eliminated all of women's rights. Lafayette lobbied for the restoration of those rights to women, including the right to divorce, to own property, and to be educated. Our plan is to bring all of these aspects of Lafayette's life to the full attention of Americans today. As the AFL solidifies plans for this bicentennial, each and every one of you can join with us to participate in this celebration. If you are interested in volunteering in Wilmington or Newcastle, or both, please let us know and join with us to recreate the events that are happening in these two sites on October 6th of this year. So in summary, why is Lafayette important to us today? We would have lost the American Revolution without Lafayette's orchestration of French aid as well as its actions at Yorktown, and we would still be a British colony. Our Franco-American alliance and friendship would never have existed. Lafayette was critically important as both a leader and politician in the French Revolution. His document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, essentially framed a political and social democracy and is recognized today as the very definition of the new age of human rights. And finally, he was the very first international advocate to address the importance of human rights, leading the way through history for many others to follow his example even unto today. Please do consider joining the American Friends of Lafayette to help us recreate Lafayette's farewell tour, but also to bring to the attention of the public this great man who embodied the values we so need today: friendship, respect, human devotion, humanity, honor, liberty, democracy, and equality for all. Now, in closing, let us remember the young 17-year-old Gilbert Lafayette, who, with his zeal for the ideals of liberty and freedom, came from France in 1777 and captured the hearts of both his adopted father, George Washington, and his adopted country, America. And let us celebrate in 2024 through 2025 the bicentennial of Lafayette's farewell tour, together remembering and honoring this man who represents the very definition of democracy, our own American Revolutionary War Major General and the hero of two worlds, Gilbert, the Marquis de Lafayette. Huzzah for America and Vive Lafayette, and this works. Thank you. Yes, the book that Lavassieur wrote, it was published, I think, 3 years after they got back to France. And again, Lafayette's main purpose in hunting this country was to take back to France what the fruits and wealth was of having a democracy. So it was not meant to be a major claim by King Charles X, but the people enjoyed it. And yes, just go on, you can go on Amazon. It's Lafayette's Journey, 1824-25, and the author's name is Alan Hoffman, Hoffman, and he is president of the American Friends of Lafayette, by the way. He actually translated it from French. The other book people always ask me is, what is a good book to read, just as a general overview of Lafayette's life? And it's Mike Duncan's book, D-U-N-C-A-N, which is Lafayette, the Hero of Two Worlds. And he also has an audio version. He is a podcaster, an excellent historian, and so you can listen to it also on podcast. And then children's books, there is an excellent one done by Celine Castrovella, and it's called Revolutionary Friends, and it's the story of Lafayette and Washington as father and son. And what happened to
I understand that he was quite a military tactician, and that he introduced during the war this like guerrilla warfare where you are in the woods and you shoot and run, and that was pivotal in several battles.
Let's say he was an excellent logistician, military-wise. He pledged, his father died when he was 2 years old, and he had already pledged himself. His family went all the way back to the time of Joan of Arc, and they fought beside Joan of Arc. So when he was very young, his father died during the 7 Years' War, the Battle of Minden, and was struck by a British cannon. Lafayette, as he grew older, only wanted to go into the military. So at the age of 16, he married Adrienne, who was 14. And so his father-in-law, Duc de Noailles, was actually high up in the French government. And so he was able to get him an assignment in the Black Musketeers, were the Musketeers that you read about in the story. So he was a lieutenant in the Black Musketeers at around the age of 16 or something. So it was more having parades and such. But he studied earnestly at Metz, France, which was the outlying area in France. And he spoke Latin fluently. He was well educated in terms of military tactics. He continued to study it when he came over on the ship. But he was trained in French military tactics, which were the lined-up officers. And he was very smart, and he was very aware, and he quickly learned how valuable it was to have guerrilla techniques, and he used that everywhere. He was the master at the hit and run, hit and run, hit and run, which is what I was talking earlier with someone about what he did on his way from Williamsburg to Yorktown and before. Because he had been assigned by Washington to go find the traitor,
Benedict Arnold.
Benedict Arnold, right. So he was in Virginia because Benedict Arnold was heading the British at the time. So he was down there trying to get Benedict Arnold, but he staged his following of Cornwallis, who was actually going to Yorktown to try to pick up a ship and go up to New England. But he staged his techniques in such a way, using that kind of guerrilla warfare and snipers on the route, to make the militia, who were not coming out to support the American cause by this time, but he did it so well that they all thought that he was chasing Cornwallis to Yorktown. So the militia comes out of the woodwork from Virginia, and so his troops swell from about 2,000 to 6,000 or 7,000 by that time. And then by that, of course, we know that Rochambeau and Washington came down, met in Williamsburg, and they formed Yorktown and some victories. It was Lafayette who did that, who made that happen, in the sense of getting him cornered and not letting him go. But yes, good question, because he did learn guerrilla tactics, and he used it when he went back to France to a certain extent.
The Masons of Delaware built a new home for their Grand Lodge in 1871. It's the Grand Opera House in Wilmington, and they still occupy the upper 2 floors where they have their archives, and there's a variety of Lafayette memorabilia there as well.
He visited every Freemason lodge when he went across all of the 24 states that he visited, because he was an artist. Because many people think of the Freemasons as the secret society that does all the secret things. They were the actual source of the Enlightenment ideals. They were the ones that began to push early on for democracy and liberty and equal rights for all. So Washington was, most of the other generals in the American Revolution were, and so was Lafayette, which was that time point, as I said before. But yes, they can be having those come out when he visits here.
In Wilmington, I'm not sure what artifacts they have coming out. We do have some here coming out. They're specific to New Hampshire.
I'm such a Lafayetteist geek.
Point of information, Lafayette's relation with Ellen McLean was long-standing, long before the Yorktown campaign. McLean commanded an independent cavalry company mainly made up of Native Americans. And they were with Lafayette at Barron Hill, and it's thought that McLean and his American Indians played a key role in Lafayette's escape from Barron Hill, where he was almost captured.
I didn't know McLean was there. That is interesting. I didn't know that, so thank you for that, because that escape, I mean, he was already like, Washington told him 50 times, now look, don't camp in the same place ever. And of course, being a young man, he camped in the same place, which is when they found out that, the British found out that he was there, and that escape down the hill had to have been orchestrated with the help of the Native Americans to be able to get away from where he was.
I've always found, too, your reference to Lafayette versus Benedict Arnold in Virginia. Of course, Lafayette was joining him, and with Friedrich von Schweiden. You hear it's Benedict Arnold from one of the oldest and most distinguished families in Connecticut.
Okay.
And it's two immigrants, neither of whom I think spoke English when they first came. As Lafayette did, I'm not aware of it. I know von Schweiden did not.
Right, because when he was at Valley Forge, Lafayette was one of the people that helped translate. And I mean, he did a lot of swearing too, so we all know that, yeah. And he had his two little dogs with him, and he has 2 friends with him.
Congress and
Yeah.
Washington
He's a great guy.
had a somewhat more liberal attitude toward immigration than many Americans today.
Yeah. I mean, the story of him at Valley Forge is also great. It's just an incredible story.
I have read also that not only is the soil from Bunker Hill over his grave, but also soil from the Brandywine battlefield where he spilled his blood. Have you
You know,
read
and
that?
that's a really good question because he and George were collecting soil in all the states that he went to. Then he's going up the Mississippi River, and in Indiana, they struck a reef on the ship they were in, the Mechanic, and it actually, the name of the ship was the Mechanic, and it sunk. Along with it went all the soil, the gifts that he had received, gifts he was going to be giving to others. The question was, they thought he was going to be drowned. They couldn't find his son, and he was worried to death that his son had drowned. But he actually, George, like his father, was helping everybody off the boat and getting them onto the shore, so they finally reunited. It was a very emotional time for Lafayette. So when they finished the tour, they went to Bunker Hill, and it was after he left for France that he requested by letter, please send the soil of that site and send it over to France. So as far as we know, the only soil that was placed on his grave is Bunker Hill. But, you know, history is not static. So if someone finds some letters in the top of their attic, please let us know to find out more about that. But he originally had started out trying to get soil from every single state of the 24 states of the Union. It's a great question.
Thank you for the presentation, really excellent. You mentioned he had one son. I was wondering if he had any other children, and did they follow him in military service or in political service? And then the second question is...
Don't give me more than one question.
Sorry. The second question is, I've never been to France, so I don't know, certainly want to go. What is your view of France and Lafayette today as time has changed?
Two excellent questions, right? There were 3 children. Actually, there were 4 born. Henriette was the first one. She was born before Lafayette left. While he was in France, she died at the age of 2. Then the second child Adrian was pregnant when he came to the United States in early pregnancy. The second child was Anastasia. The third child was born on Christmas Eve. That was George Washington. And the 4th child was a virgin who was named after the state of Virginia. So it was 2 girls and a boy. George did go into the military under Napoleon, under Charles X, and then under Napoleon. Napoleon did not want another Lafayette in his life. So he actually did not allow him to progress. He was an excellent soldier. He was an excellent soldier and leader of his men, but he was sideswiped all the time in making progression within the military in France. So he finally just said, I can't do this anymore, and he went and did political work. The 2 daughters ended up marrying people of higher level, but both spoke fluently English and American. In fact, when people visited Lafayette, he was, after he left the American Revolution, went back to France, he often loved to have his kids come in. They would entertain the guests by speaking English and doing songs in English. So yeah, we had 3, we actually, at our kickoff event this August, we will have great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Lafayette at our event with her 2 daughters who will be here. And we met 2 other Lafayette descendants last week at the opening of the Anderson House's exhibit on Lafayette. And so they will also be participating as the guests of us during the event. And the answer to, and I remember the questions, yeah, I remember. The second question, no. France, like I said, France did not want to honor him when he died. And many French do not even remember who he is. Because they see him as the person who kind of worked to try with the French Revolution. And they saw him as someone who was trying to keep the French Revolution. In this country, we were used to having, representation. This courthouse tells you about representation. The French were not used to it. They had no idea what representation was or what a democracy was. And he's bringing these ideas back to try to create a democracy in France. So he is trying really hard against somewhat of a brick wall. And he was head of the National Guard, and he was trying to maintain what he soon realized would only work, and that was going to be a democratic monarchy. But the people, at that point, having been revved up by the Jacobins, who were brought on the Reign of Terror, really were all thinking about they were going to have freedom, not really understanding what representative freedom and democracy was. So that's when he ended up going to Austria and being imprisoned. But he continued to try to bring the ideals, but he had to find that middle road of a democratic monarchy. It wasn't going to be a democracy like our country. And so they look at him more associated with the French Revolution than they see him as a liberator and a human rights advocate. Although later on he did. So that's an excellent question.
You said he was a Mason. He was Catholic. And they were allowed in then?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's no, the Masons are not, I think there's a central belief in God with it. But you can be of any denomination to be a Freemason. The Freemasonry was very active in France. Started, if I remember, in England, and then I don't remember. But they were many of the French army were Freemasons, because these are young guys that are going to school, and it's really. The irony of it is they're going to school and studying Cicero and the great Greek and Roman literature about freedom and democracy, and they're being ruled by an undemocratic king. So when they're in there studying about the Enlightenment, and then the next morning they wake up and say, they have many many.
All right. It's something that they believe Masons are not religious, and they are very good.
They have central belief in God as a single person. Yes. But again, and those who misunderstand some of the things, because they, again, it's like starting the American Revolution with Battle of Lexington forgets the entire committee of correspondence that laid the groundwork for bringing the colonies together. And, thinking about the democracy without including the Freemasons and how much they supported the Enlightenment ideals is forgetting about what happened in history.
So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Patty has come up from Maryland. Actually, she came down last night from Brooklyn, as she was saying. So we'd like to just present a small token of our appreciation in the DAR. Celebration of our ties of friendship and service to celebrate. So if you would like, again, we have the calendars back there. They are from July 2024 through December 2025.
They're the entire tour every single day. And then the other thing you can do is we have our new website, lafayette200.org, which if you go into that on your phone and look it up, it is being populated under events. When you hit the event tab, you'll see all the events that are now being populated that are going to be happening between August 16th in New York City and Washington, D.C. on September 7th.
And the DAR, actually Daughters of the American Revolution, celebrates our ancestors, men and women, who helped this country find our freedom. And we work today, we are the world's largest women's service organization with historic preservation, education, and patriotism, which covers our veterans and honors our veterans and our active duty military. Is there anyone in this room who's a veteran? If you please stand. Well, that's okay. There's a Vietnam Veterans bookmark. You're welcome to take these. They are free. We do have brochures in the DAR, on the AFL, and the calendars at the back table. And lastly, if you'd like more information about the events happening here in Delaware and elsewhere, if you'll just sign your name and email, and we'll make sure you get on that mailing list. And thank you all again.
Kim brought also a handout that has all the dates and some that you can determine events that are going to be happening. So.
Thank you all again. And for those who didn't know you had to RSVP, we're patient and see. Thank you so much.
And thank you all.